They showed up at my house with a tape measure like it was a crime scene, as if my flagpole was a weapon, and I was some kind of criminal. But I wasn't breaking the law. I was breaking their control. Every morning since I bought this little brick house on Maple Ash Court, I had the same ritual. I'd slip outside just as the sun began to burn the mist off the lawns, barefoot on the dew-soaked grass, and raise my flag. It was more than fabric to me. It was the same flag I'd folded into my duffel when I came home from my last Navy tour. The same flag I had clutched at my father's funeral when he was buried with honors. For me, it was routine, respect, and remembrance. That morning, the air smelled sharp, the kind of crispness that only early autumn carries when the grass is wet but the leaves are just beginning to brown. The pulley squeaked as I hauled the flag up, and when it reached the top, the cloth cracked in the wind like a rifle shot. That sound always gave me a jolt of pride, a reminder of discipline and sacrifice. But before I could take a breath and salute, I saw them. Two shadows crossing my driveway. Thaddeus Prynne, the self-appointed emperor of our HOA, was strutting toward me with a leather-bound clipboard clutched to his chest like scripture. His suit was too sharp for a man that early in the morning, pressed so stiff you could hear the creases. His gray hair slicked back, his jaw tight with that smug smirk he wore whenever he thought he was untouchable. And trailing behind him, like a cold draft that followed wherever she went, was Mavis Drouet, his secretary. Thin, severe, with a mouth that looked carved into a permanent frown. Neither of them said good morning. Neither of them had ever said good morning. "Mrs. Rowan," Thaddeus announced, voice oily and official. "We need to talk about this." He tilted his head toward the flagpole like it was a corpse at a crime scene. I lowered my salute slowly. "About what?" Mavis stepped forward, snapping open a chrome tape measure with the same satisfaction a gunslinger might draw a revolver. The metallic zip cut through the air, sharp and cold. She dragged it across the pole's base, eyes narrowing like she'd just caught me hiding contraband. "This pole," she said flatly, "is out of compliance." The words didn't even make sense at first. I blinked at her, then looked at the pole, then back at Thaddeus. "Out of compliance? It's a flagpole. It's vertical metal in the ground. What compliance?" Thaddeus smiled that thin-lipped smile of his, the one that made my stomach twist because it was never about what he said. It was about the pleasure he took in saying it. "The community bylaws clearly state that no structure may exceed the approved height parameters. This," he said, tapping the pole with his pen like it was evidence in a courtroom, "is clearly in violation. We'll be issuing fines immediately." The chill in the air no longer felt refreshing. It bit. It stung. The smell of cut grass seemed sharper, almost acrid. My flag cracked above us like it was trying to drown him out. I clenched my fists. "That's not in the bylaws. I've read them." Mavis scribbled something down, not even looking up. "You'll receive notice within the week. Non-compliance fees begin at $500 per day." $500 per day. For a moment, I couldn't hear anything but my pulse roaring in my ears. All the mornings I'd stood here in quiet pride, and now these two came marching onto my property to criminalize a flagpole? No, not the pole. Me. Because I knew in that instant, this wasn't about height. It wasn't about metal or numbers. It was about power, about control. And Thaddeus Prynne enjoyed nothing more than crushing the people he thought were too small to fight back. I should have argued more. I should have told him to shove that clipboard. But in that moment, all I could do was stare at the smirk creeping across his face as he signed the form. That smirk wasn't about rules. It wasn't about aesthetics. It was about conquest. And as he tore the slip from his pad and handed it to me like a king issuing judgment, I realized what he wanted most wasn't to take down a flagpole. Thaddeus smiled when he wrote that fine. That smile told me he wasn't after my flagpole. He was after me. The notice came 3 days later, slipped into my mailbox like a royal decree. Heavy cream paper, thick enough to feel expensive, embossed with the HOA's crest in shiny green ink. I didn't need to open it to know what it said. The arrogance radiated straight through the envelope, but I tore it open anyway, standing right there on the porch with the morning sun stabbing through the trees. The first thing that hit me was the smell. Fresh toner, chemical and sharp, like the inside of a copy room where documents multiply to smother the truth. My eyes caught the fine print immediately. Violation notice. Non-compliant flagpole. Beneath it, in bold black letters, was the penalty. $500 per day until removal. My hands trembled as I gripped the letter tighter. The embossed seal pressed hard into my thumb, almost painful, as if even the paper wanted to remind me of its authority. It was the same old HOA tactic. Make it look official, make it feel impossible to challenge, and watch the homeowner fold. But something in me rebelled at the thought of folding. I looked down the street, and that's when I saw him. Silas Creel. He lived 2 doors down, a widower with sad eyes and a voice so soft you leaned in to catch it. He had a way of sitting on his porch in the evenings, hands folded, as if waiting for someone who would never come back. He shuffled toward me now, his plaid shirt hanging loose, and nodded toward the envelope in my hand. "They've run people out before," he said quietly, almost like he was afraid the trees themselves were listening. "What do you mean?" I asked. His gaze dropped to the cracked sidewalk. "Fines, liens, lawsuits. People give up, pack up, move out. Thaddeus always wins." The weight of the letter seemed to double in my hand. I could almost see the strategy: pile on daily penalties until a working family couldn't breathe, couldn't pay, couldn't fight back. A flagpole today, a foreclosure tomorrow. I went inside, spread the letter on my kitchen table, and forced myself to read every word. That's where I saw it. Violation under Article 4, Section C, aesthetic uniformity. Aesthetic uniformity. What did that even mean? My pole wasn't neon. It wasn't crooked or dangerous. It wasn't carved into the shape of a dragon. It was a flagpole. Silver, simple, standing straight and true. I traced my finger down the clause again. It was so vague it could apply to anything. A front door painted a slightly brighter shade of red. A flower bed that dared to hold too many roses. Even a child's basketball hoop could be declared a violation if the board felt like it. That's when my training kicked in. The Navy had taught me that vague orders meant danger. Orders that weren't precise were traps waiting to close. And this clause was nothing but a net, woven loosely so they could tighten it on anyone at any time. I remembered something I had once heard from a fellow veteran who lost his home to an HOA battle. Vague rules are a bluff, and like any bluff, you have to call it. In most states, HOAs cannot enforce rules that aren't written with specificity in the official county-filed covenants. If a rule is too vague, it won't hold up in court. That's where their arrogance trips them, because they count on fear, not law. I read the clause again. Aesthetic uniformity. They thought it was a noose, but I saw it for what it really was. A threadbare rope, fraying at the edges. Still, that didn't stop my stomach from twisting into knots. I knew Thaddeus wasn't just flexing the bylaws. He was flexing his power. And Silas's words echoed like a warning. They've run people out before. For a moment, I felt cornered, like a rat shoved into the back of a cage with no way out. That letter wasn't just paper. It was a weapon, designed to bleed me dry, to break me before I could even lift a defense. But I wasn't the type to roll over. Not anymore. I pushed the letter aside and leaned back in my chair, breathing slow, deliberate breaths. That's when my eyes flicked to the back page, and something caught me. A clause they hadn't expected anyone to notice. A clause that didn't just weaken their case, it flipped it entirely. And in that instant, my fear shifted into something else. Determination. I thought I was cornered, until I spotted one clause that flipped the entire game. The clause I'd found gave me hope, but Thaddeus and Mavis must have sensed I wasn't backing down. Within days, their retaliation arrived not as a single strike, but as a flood. One morning I opened my mailbox and nearly laughed, except my laughter caught in my throat. Stuffed inside were 5 separate violation slips, the papers jammed so tightly the metal door bowed outward. I carried the stack inside, dropped it on the kitchen table, and flipped through them in disbelief. My lawn was too long. My mailbox paint was non-conforming. My shutters were faded. Even my wind chimes, 3 brass tubes that had hung there since I moved in, were suddenly deemed excessive noise pollution. It wasn't enforcement. It was war by paper cuts. Reverie Quinn, my partner, stood over my shoulder as I spread the notices out like a fan of accusations. Reverie was all contrasts, sharp eyes that always saw the angles, but a heart that preferred peace over conflict. She touched my arm gently, her voice carrying both worry and pleading. "Callista, maybe you should just let this go. Take the flagpole down. Pay the fines. We can't fight them all." I looked at her. Really looked. The fear in her voice was real. Reverie had seen how battles can consume people. She didn't want me swallowed up by this HOA's venom. For a moment, I wanted to tell her she was right, that I'd lay low, that we'd be safe if I just complied. But my gut twisted. "They're not after the flag, Rev," I said, my voice low. "They're after us. If I bend now, we'll never stop bending. And one day, this won't be our home anymore." Her eyes filled with unease, but she didn't argue. She knew I wasn't the bending kind. The harassment didn't stop at the mailbox. Each day a different inspector from the HOA strolled down my street, never alone, always with a clipboard and camera. They lingered at my driveway, measuring, photographing, whispering into radios like they were part of some neighborhood intelligence unit. I started noticing the little things first. The crunch of gravel under polished shoes as they approached. The sharp plastic click of a camera shutter firing off multiple shots of my lawn. Once, when I stepped outside to confront them, I caught the faint trace of Mavis Drouet's perfume in the breeze, an overpowering floral scent that made the back of my throat tighten. She'd been here, orchestrating. The message was clear: "We're watching you." At night, I lay awake listening for footsteps outside the window. Every creak of a branch against the siding made me tense. I'd faced worse in uniform, but the battlefield had been honest then. You saw your enemy. Here, it was whispers, papers, and shadows. One afternoon, I decided to test them. I stood on my porch as an inspector across the street pretended to study the cracks in the sidewalk while his camera aimed squarely at my shutters. I raised my hand and waved. He froze, then muttered something into his radio before retreating toward the cul-de-sac. It wasn't just intimidation, it was psychological warfare. They wanted me to feel like a criminal in my own house, to make the walls that were supposed to protect me feel like a prison. And damn it, it was working. Reverie saw it in me. One night, she slipped her hand into mine across the kitchen table. "You don't have to win every war, Callie. Sometimes surviving is enough." Her words broke something inside me, because surviving had always been enough when I was younger, when I was fighting battles overseas just to make it back home. But here, in the house I'd worked for, sweated for, sacrificed for, no, survival wasn't enough. I stood, walked to the window, and pulled back the curtain. Outside, under the pale glow of a streetlight, I saw another inspector loitering, camera ready. My pulse quickened, but this time it wasn't fear fueling it. It was rage. If Thaddeus thought drowning me in paper and fear would silence me, he hadn't met a Rowan yet. The inspectors thought they had me pinned to the wall. But what they didn't understand was that the more they pressed, the more stubborn I became. And I had one weapon left that they didn't. Curiosity. If they were going to drown me in violations, I was going to drown them in their own secrets. So I started where any good investigator does, at night, alone, with nothing but my laptop and a mug of coffee going cold on the counter. I searched the county's website for every scrap of information tied to Maple Ash Court's HOA. Most of it was the usual fluff: mission statements, meeting notices, and the carefully worded newsletters Thaddeus loved to shove in our mailboxes. But buried in a dull PDF was something that caught my eye. A line that every homeowner has the right to review the association's financial records upon request. It was like striking gold. You see, by law, HOAs cannot refuse a homeowner's demand to inspect their books. It's not a courtesy, It's a right. Most people don't know that, or they're too intimidated to push. But intimidation had lost its effect on me. If they wanted a war, I'd fight it with paper. The next morning, I drove to the county clerk's office. The place smelled like old paper and mildew, the kind of institutional odor that seeps into the walls and never leaves. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, faint and irritating, like mosquitoes that never landed. I slid my request across the counter and braced myself. The clerk, a tired-looking woman with glasses dangling from a chain, scanned the form and sighed. "You're the second person this month asking about the Maple Ash Court HOA. My pulse quickened. Who was the first? She pursed her lips, leaning closer. Guy named Edmund Locke. Said he used to be the treasurer before he resigned. Didn't look too happy about it. Edmund Locke. I tucked the name away like a bullet in the chamber. Later that night, after a dozen phone calls, I tracked him down. His voice on the line was heavy, worn down by years of swallowing anger. "You don't know what you're poking at, Ms. Rowan," he warned. "They're thieves in suits. That's all they are, and they'll bleed you if you get in the way." I leaned into the phone, whispering like a co-conspirator. "Then help me stop them." A pause, then a sigh. "Check the landscaping contracts. Start there." So back I went. For hours I pored over invoices and receipts, my fingertips turning gray from the dust of old files. Every page I turned seemed to tell the same story. Money flowing out, but not in ways that made sense. Landscaping contracts billed at triple the normal rate. Payments authorized without competitive bids. And every single one tied to a company owned by a man named Prynne, Thaddeus's cousin. The proof was right there, ink bleeding into paper, arrogance hiding in plain sight. He wasn't just a bully with a clipboard. He was a thief. He had been funneling homeowner dues into his family's pockets for years, and no one had called him out. I pushed the papers aside and rubbed my eyes. My coffee had gone stone cold hours ago, leaving a bitter taste at the back of my throat. The hum of the lights overhead drilled into my skull. My fingers were gritty with dust, my clothes carrying the scent of old paper like a second skin. But none of it mattered. Because staring at those contracts, I realized the truth. This was never about my flagpole. The fines, the inspections, the intimidation, those were just tools, distractions, weapons to silence me before I stumbled onto the real story. I sat back, staring at the ceiling of that empty records office, my chest rising and falling with slow, deliberate breaths. That night, staring at the proof, I knew this wasn't just a fight over a flag. It was a war over corruption. By the time I left the records office, my outrage had hardened into resolve. The contracts didn't just show corruption, they screamed it. Thaddeus had been bleeding this community for years, hiding his theft under layers of bureaucracy and fear. And as long as everyone stayed silent, he would keep getting away with it. I drove home in a fog of adrenaline. My hands gripped the steering wheel too tightly, my mind racing. I couldn't just stash this evidence in a drawer. I needed to shine a spotlight on it, something so loud, so undeniable, that not even Thaddeus could smother it with legal jargon or intimidation tactics. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the idea hit me like lightning. If Thaddeus wanted to weaponize my flagpole, I'd use it as my battlefield. I grabbed a notebook from the kitchen, ripped it open, and started sketching furiously. Not another neat little American flag fluttering in the breeze. No. A banner. A massive one. Bright, bold, and impossible to ignore. The words came quickly, scrawled across the page in thick marker. HOA board steals from homeowners. Proof inside. It was blunt. It was dangerous. And it was exactly what this war demanded. Reverie walked in just as I was shading in the letters. She froze, staring at the page like I had lost my mind. "Callista," she whispered. "What are you doing?" I looked up, meeting her worried eyes. "I'm fighting fire with fire." Her voice trembled with panic. "Do you understand what they'll do to you? They'll sue. They'll drain us in court. They're already draining us." I cut her off, slamming the marker down on the table. Every dollar of our dues is going into Thaddeus's cousin's pocket. Every day they stalk this house, they chip away at our freedom. I won't sit here and watch them choke us. Not when I have the truth in my hands." She bit her lip, torn between fear and faith. Finally she whispered, "Then you'll need help." That's how I found myself dialing an old number I hadn't called in years. Balthazar Pike. My Navy buddy, the kind of man who never left a comrade stranded. He picked up on the second ring, his gravelly voice instantly pulling me back to long nights overseas. "Rowan? Thought you were done with battles." "Not this one," I said. "I need a banner. The biggest you can make." There was a pause, then a low chuckle. "Now that sounds like the Callista I remember. Bring the design. I'll handle the rest." 2 days later, I stepped into Balthazar's print shop, and the plan became real. The air inside was heavy with the smell of hot ink and metal, the kind of industrial tang that stuck to your clothes. Machines the size of trucks thrummed and rattled, the floor vibrating beneath my boots as rolls of fabric fed into their mouths like sacrifices. Balthazar stood at the controls, his broad shoulders hunched, his beard streaked with silver. When he saw me, he raised an eyebrow. "You sure about this? Once it's up, there's no going back." I nodded, handing him the design. "I'm more than sure. I'm ready." He grinned, that old battle-scar grin. "Then let's make some noise." The printers roared to life, spitting out yard after yard of bright white fabric, scarlet letters burning across it like fire. I stood there, the vibrations rattling up through my bones, watching as my words, our truth, came alive, larger than life. The smell of ink coated my throat, acrid and electric. Every thump of the machinery felt like a war drum. Hours later, Balthazar and I spread the banner across the warehouse floor. It stretched nearly the length of the building, the letters bold enough to shout from a block away. Reverie stood in the doorway, arms crossed, fear still flickering in her eyes, but even she couldn't look away. The message was simple. The impact would be devastating. As I stared down at the banner, its scarlet words blazing back at me, I felt my pulse steady. This wasn't just a plan. It was a declaration. When Balthazar and I unrolled it across the warehouse floor, I realized this banner wasn't just a message. It was a declaration of war. The morning I raised the banner, the air felt charged, as if the world itself knew something was about to change. The grass was still wet with dew, the sky streaked with soft pink light. Normally, this was the quietest hour on Maple Ash Court. Lawn sprinklers ticking in the distance, birds rustling in the hedges. But not today. Today, I was about to set fire to their illusion of control. I stood at the base of my flagpole, rope coiled in my hands, heart pounding hard enough to rattle my ribs. The banner, 50 feet of white fabric with scarlet letters bold enough to be read from the cul-de-sac, lay rolled at my feet. Balthazar's work was flawless. The words seemed to burn even in the dim dawn. HOA board steals from homeowners. Proof inside. My hands trembled as I tied it to the pole. Not from fear, but from the weight of what I was about to unleash. This wasn't a quiet protest. This wasn't an appeal letter. This was war in bold print. I pulled the rope, the pulleys squealing as the banner rose higher and higher. Fabric unfurling with a heavy whoosh. The moment it caught the morning wind, it came alive, snapping and rippling like a living thing. The sound echoed like thunder through the street. One by one, curtains flew open. Windows cracked. Neighbors peered out, eyes wide, mouths hanging open. Some gasped. Others whispered. A few even stepped onto their porches, squinting up at the banner as it stretched across the sky like a giant verdict. I could almost hear their thoughts. She actually did it. She called them out. It didn't take long for the enemy to arrive. From halfway down the block I saw Thaddeus Prynne barreling toward me, his expensive shoes slapping against the pavement. Mavis Drouet trotting close behind, her clipboard clutched like a shield. His face was already red, veins bulging at his temples, his perfectly combed hair coming undone with every furious stride. "Rowan," he bellowed, his voice cracking the morning calm. "Take that down. Take it down immediately." I stood my ground, the banner cracking overhead like artillery fire. Neighbors lingered on their porches watching. They weren't stepping in, not yet, but they were witnessing. And that was enough for now. Mavis raised her pen, scribbling furiously, as if the act of writing alone could erase what stood towering above us. "This is an egregious violation of bylaws," she snapped. "You'll be fined for every second it remains up." Thaddeus stopped at the foot of my driveway, spittle flying as he shouted up at me. "This is defamation. This is slander. You'll regret this, Rowan." His voice cracked on the last word, half rage, half desperation. I let him scream. The words didn't matter. What mattered was the sight above us. The truth printed in scarlet letters, too large to be ignored, too bold to be buried in fine print. For the first time, he looked small. The banner thundered again in the wind, drowning him out. Neighbors murmured. A woman across the street raised her phone, filming. I saw Silas Creel step onto his porch, his frail frame shaking, but this time, he was smiling. I turned back to Thaddeus, my voice steady, deliberate. "The truth isn't slander. And if you're scared of this banner, maybe it's because you know it's true." His face twisted, a mix of rage and fear, and for a second I thought he might actually lunge at me. But before he could move, the sound cut through the air, low, steady, and unmistakable. The whoop of a siren. I turned, and down the street, the flashing lights of a police cruiser split the morning sun. The car rolled slowly toward us, red and blue strobes painting every house on Maple Ash Court in pulsing colors. Neighbors leaned closer, whispering louder. Some raised their phones higher, recording everything. My pulse quickened, but I didn't flinch. Because if Thaddeus thought the banner was his worst nightmare, he was about to learn the real fight hadn't even started yet. And then the flashing lights of a police cruiser cut through the morning sun. The cruiser rolled to a stop in front of my house, red and blue lights cutting through the soft gold of the morning sun. My banner snapped overhead like rolling thunder, its scarlet words impossible to miss. The entire neighborhood seemed to hold its breath. Curtains twitched, phones hovered in hands, neighbors whispered from porches. The driver's side door opened with a deliberate creak, and out stepped Officer Jericho Van. He wasn't what I expected. He wasn't the kind of cop who tried to make up for insecurity with swagger. He moved slow, steady, his boots crunching on the asphalt with measured calm. He adjusted his belt, his hand resting casually near his holster, not out of threat but out of instinct. The sun hit the badge on his chest, sending a sharp glint across the street, a reminder of authority that didn't need to be shouted. Jericho took in the scene with a glance, the banner roaring above, Thaddeus practically foaming at the mouth, Mavis scribbling so fast her pen threatened to tear through the paper, and me standing firm at the base of the flagpole, heart pounding but face steady. He stopped halfway up my driveway, tilting his head slightly. His voice was calm, deep, even. "Morning. What seems to be the problem here?" Thaddeus lunged forward like he'd been waiting for the cue. "The problem, officer, is right there." He jabbed a trembling finger upward, his voice cracking with fury. That sign. It's an illegal banner. A violation of community code and state law. She's defaming this entire board and disrupting the neighborhood. I demand you remove it immediately and place her under arrest." His words echoed too loudly for a quiet street. The neighbors stirred, whispering more. Some chuckled, others shook their heads. Thaddeus had gone from smug tyrant to a man teetering on the edge of desperation. Jericho's eyes flicked up at the banner, scanning the letters slowly, as though he was making sure he read it right. HOA board steals from homeowners, proof inside. Then he lowered his gaze back to Thaddeus. He didn't answer. He didn't rush. He let the silence stretch, and the silence was damning. Mavis jumped in, her voice sharp and shrill. "This is unauthorized signage under HOA bylaws. Large displays must be approved by the Architectural Committee, and this was clearly not approved. It violates Article 4, Section A of our Uniformity Code, as well as Section B, subsection. Jericho held up a hand, palm outward. Ma'am, I'll hear both sides. Then his gaze turned to me. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes were steady. Ma'am, is this your property? Yes, I said firmly. It's mine, paid for, every brick of it. And that flagpole is on my property line. And the banner? I lifted my chin. Also mine, and what it says is true. I've reviewed the financial records of this HOA, and I have evidence that funds are being misused. This banner is not slander, it's free speech, and it's fact. Jericho shifted his weight, boots crunching again against the gravel. He turned back to Thaddeus. What law specifically do you claim she's violating? Thaddeus sputtered. The bylaws, the HOA's regulations. We are a governing body, and she is in clear violation of community standards. This circus undermines our authority. There it was. Not safety, not legality, authority. Jericho let the word hang in the air. Then he looked back at me. You got any legal protections you want to cite? I nodded. Yes, officer. State law protects homeowners' rights to fly the United States flag, regardless of HOA restrictions. That's federal in many cases, too. And while they're trying to twist it into a signage violation, they can't restrict lawful displays that expose corruption. Their own bylaws don't override state or federal law. And vague codes like aesthetic uniformity don't stand in court. Legal nugget 3. In many states, HOAs cannot prohibit or restrict a homeowner from displaying the American flag. Federal law also protects flag display under the Freedom to Display the American Flag Act of 2005. And vague HOA rules often collapse under scrutiny in court. Jericho's jaw flexed. He nodded slowly, once, then turned back to Thaddeus. She's right. HOA rules aren't above state or federal law. Unless you can cite a clear statute that makes that banner illegal, I don't see a crime here. The vein in Thaddeus's temple pulsed so hard I thought it might burst. This is outrageous. You're siding with her? With her? She's defaming elected officials of this association. She's exercising her rights. Jericho interrupted, his tone sharpening just slightly. His calm was iron, but it was iron nonetheless. And unless you want to file a civil suit, there's nothing criminal here. Which means this is not a police matter. The murmurs from the neighbors grew louder, bolder. Some even clapped quietly. I caught Silas Creel on his porch, arms folded, nodding with something like satisfaction. Thaddeus turned on me, face twisted with rage, spittle hitting the pavement as he spat out his words. You'll regret this, Rowan. You'll regret every second of this stunt. I met his glare evenly. Maybe, but at least I won't regret staying silent. For a moment, it looked like he might actually collapse under the weight of his own fury. His lips trembled, his fists clenched, and Mavis tugged at his sleeve like a handler trying to calm a wild animal. He jerked away, chest heaving, eyes locked on me with pure venom. Jericho leaned slightly closer to me, his voice low, almost conspiratorial. They don't have a case. Not here. Not now. Stand your ground. The relief that washed through me was immediate but fragile. For the first time in weeks, someone in authority had told me what I already knew in my gut. I wasn't the criminal here. They were. But before I could breathe, before I could even let that relief settle in my bones, another sound cut through the air. The deep, hollow hum of diesel engines. I turned, and my stomach dropped. 2 news vans rounded the corner, cameras already mounted on their roofs, logos splashed across the sides. Reporters spilled out, microphones in hand, cameramen lugging tripods across the street. The story had just left the block. The story was about to explode. The vans screeched to a stop like sharks scenting blood in the water. Doors slammed, cameras were hoisted, and suddenly Maple Ash Court looked less like a neighborhood and more like a press conference. A tall woman with sharp cheekbones and eyes that missed nothing marched straight toward me, microphone in hand. Sorrel Dane. I'd seen her face on the evening news. Tough, relentless, The kind of reporter who smelled scandal before anyone else. She didn't waste time. "Callista Rowan," she said, voice brisk, commanding. "You're accusing your HOA of theft and corruption. What proof do you have?" Her microphone hovered inches from my lips, the cameras behind her already rolling. The banner cracked and rippled overhead, casting its scarlet message across the scene like a backdrop on a stage. For a split second, I hesitated. My whole life, I'd never asked to be the center of attention. But this wasn't about me anymore. It was about the truth. So I raised my voice so the whole block could hear. "I've reviewed the HOA's financial records. Contracts were awarded without bids, inflated beyond reason, and paid to companies tied directly to the board president's family. That's not management, it's theft." Gasps rippled across the neighbors gathered on porches. Phones shot upward, recording every word. Sorrel's eyes sharpened, the kind of look reporters get when they know they've struck gold. Behind her, a dozen camera shutters clicked in rapid bursts. I could feel the heat of portable lamps turning my driveway into a stage. Notepads rustled as assistants scribbled furiously. The air itself seemed electric, charged with the crackle of a story breaking wide open. And then it happened. Silas Creel, quiet, gentle Silas, shuffled down from his porch. For years he had been a shadow of a man, his grief visible in every step. But now his back straightened. He looked into Sorrel's camera lens and spoke. "I've lived here 15 years. They fined me for planting roses. They threatened to lien my home because I built a ramp for my late wife's wheelchair. They drove her to tears, week after week. They are tyrants, not neighbors." His words cut deeper than mine ever could. They were raw, human, undeniable. Neighbors gasped again, but this time it wasn't shock. It was recognition. I saw heads nodding, eyes widening, people stepping closer as if Silas's courage cracked something inside them too. One by one others chimed in. A young mother confessed they fined her for chalk drawings on the sidewalk. An older man admitted they banned his grandkid's basketball hoop. Every story layered onto mine until the weight of outrage filled the street like thunderclouds. Thaddeus and Mavis stood frozen, pale under the harsh news lights. Their authority, once so absolute, looked brittle now, cracking under the weight of public testimony. Mavis tried to scribble notes, but her hand shook. Thaddeus's jaw worked furiously, but no words came out. I felt sweat trickle down my back, the heat of the lamps baking my skin, but I didn't flinch. This was bigger than me now. This was a movement. For the first time since this war began, I saw fear in their eyes. Not mine, theirs. The banner snapped again, loud and defiant, and I turned back to Sorrel Dane's microphone. "The people of this neighborhood deserve better. We deserve transparency, accountability, and respect. And I won't stop until this board answers for every dollar they've stolen." The crowd murmured louder, the reporters scribbled faster, the cameras zoomed in closer. But deep down, I knew exposure wasn't enough. Headlines fade. Stories die. Thaddeus would lay low, wait for the storm to pass, then crawl right back into power. And I wasn't going to let that happen, because I didn't just want headlines. I wanted justice. The news had cracked their armor, but I knew headlines alone wouldn't bring Thaddeus down. Public shame could sting, but it couldn't strip power. For that, I needed law. That's when I met Cassian Holt. Cassian was the kind of attorney you didn't find in glossy brochures or TV commercials. He was sharp, aggressive, and relentless, with a reputation for tearing through corruption like a blade. His office smelled faintly of leather and old books, his desk littered with thick case files and coffee rings. He leaned back in his chair as I laid out everything: violations, harassment, the banner, the proof of embezzlement. When I finished, he tapped his pen twice against his pad and smirked. "They've picked the wrong fight. We're not just going after fines, Callista. We're going after the board itself." It felt like oxygen flooding my lungs. For the first time, I wasn't fighting alone. Cassian wasted no time. He filed official complaints with the state HOA ombudsman, citing misuse of funds, harassment, and retaliation. Then he escalated further, lodging a formal complaint with the state attorney general's office. His words were as sharp as his suits. No fluff, no hesitation. Just accusations laid out with surgical precision. Legal nugget 4. In many states, homeowners have the right to demand HOA records, and when boards refuse, state oversight agencies can intervene. Filing with an ombudsman or attorney general can trigger investigations and force boards to comply. Within a week, subpoenas were issued. I'll never forget the sound, the heavy thud of stamped envelopes landing on my kitchen table, thick with weight and authority. Each one carried the oily ink smell of official seals, a smell that clung to my fingers as I tore them open. These weren't notices of violation. These were demands for truth. Cassian flipped through them with practiced ease. They'll have to hand over everything now. Receipts, bank records, meeting minutes. No more hiding. For a moment, the reality hit me. The HOA that had treated me like prey was now cornered, hunted by the very laws they thought they controlled. The thought both thrilled and terrified me. A few days later, I sat across from Cassian in his office. The blinds were drawn, the air thick with the scent of stale coffee and fresh ink. He slid a stack of papers across the table toward me, his expression unreadable. "Take a look," he said simply. I reached for the documents, my hands trembling slightly as I spread them open. And when Cassian slid the HOA's financials across the table, I almost couldn't believe my eyes. The emergency HOA meeting was nothing like the dull, routine gatherings I'd endured before. This wasn't about flower beds, paint colors, or lawn heights anymore. This was a trial, public and merciless. The community hall was packed beyond capacity. Neighbors spilling into the aisles, pressed against the back wall, whispering in anticipation. Folding chairs scraped across the tiled floor as people tried to squeeze closer, the metallic echoes ringing through the room like gongs. The air was heavy with the scent of too many bodies crammed together, a cocktail of cologne, sweat, and tension. Above us, the fluorescent lights flickered intermittently, buzzing like angry hornets, as if even the electricity itself wanted judgment passed tonight. At the front of the room sat the board, once smug and untouchable, now pale and cornered. Thaddeus Prynne gripped his gavel so tightly his knuckles turned bone white. His hair, once perfectly combed, stuck to his forehead with sweat. Beside him, Mavis Drouet scribbled notes furiously, her usual steel demeanor unraveling into frantic scribbles and darting eyes. I sat at the front with Cassian Holt at my side, our binder of evidence resting between us like a loaded weapon. My stomach churned, but my spine stayed straight. This was what I had fought for, the truth in the open. Thaddeus slammed his gavel down, the sound cracking through the room. "This meeting will come to order." His voice tried to command authority, but it trembled just enough to betray him. Cassian rose slowly, deliberate, his suit crisp, his gaze locked on Thaddeus. He spoke with the controlled precision of a man who knew he held the blade. "Order, Mr. Prynne, is exactly why we're here. And tonight, this community deserves to see what kind of order you've been keeping." He lifted a thick packet of documents high, his voice slicing through the tension. "These are your financials, your records, subpoenaed, verified, and irrefutable. And they tell a story of theft." Gasps rippled through the crowd. People leaned forward, phones raised, recording. The clicking of camera shutters filled the air. Cassian laid the papers flat on the table with a heavy slap, his words growing sharper. Tens of thousands of dollars drained from community funds. Landscaping contracts awarded without bids. Inflated costs, 3, sometimes 4 times the market rate. And every check signed to the same company. A company owned by your cousin, Mr. Prynne. The room erupted. Shouts, gasps, voices overlapping in fury. "You stole from us," a man roared from the back. "We trusted you," a woman cried, tears streaking her face. Another voice spat out, "I knew something was wrong with those damn fees." The crowd's fury thundered through the hall, echoing off the walls. Chairs scraped violently against the floor as people surged forward. Mavis froze, her pen slipping from her fingers, clattering loudly on the table. Her pale face drained of all color. She fumbled with her purse, stuffing papers inside with shaking hands. "Where are you going, Mavis?" someone shouted. She muttered something inaudible, clutching her bag, and slinked toward the exit. The crowd jeered as she pushed past them, head bowed in shame, her heels clattering against the floor until she vanished through the side door. At the table, two board members leaned toward each other, their whispers sharp and panicked. Finally, one of them stood, his hands trembling as he raised them. I resign. Effective immediately. I won't be part of this." The second followed, his chair screeching across the floor as he shoved it back. "Me too. I didn't sign up for this kind of corruption." The hall roared with outrage and approval, the neighbors feeding off each other's energy, their years of pent-up anger finally breaking free. Cassian raised his voice over the noise. "This is not mismanagement. This is fraud. This is embezzlement. This is betrayal of every single homeowner in this room." The words landed like hammer blows. Every eye turned back to Thaddeus. His gavel shook in his hand, his face a shade of crimson I had never seen before. Sweat trickled down his temple, glinting under the flickering fluorescent lights. He slammed the gavel again, but the sound was drowned by the crowd's fury. "You think you've exposed something?" he hissed, voice cracking as he leaned forward, his gaze locked onto me, his eyes wild. "You think you're a hero because you paraded our business in front of these people? This is nothing but a witch hunt." His words fell flat. The neighbors weren't buying it anymore. I saw it in their faces. The doubt, the fury, the betrayal. They were done being silent. Cassian leaned toward him, his voice low but carrying. "The only witchcraft here is how you convinced these people to trust you for so long." The crowd roared again, applause and shouts rattling the walls. Thaddeus's composure cracked. He rose to his feet, straightening his suit jacket as if the gesture could restore his dignity. His voice dropped low, cold, dripping venom. "You think waving papers makes you powerful, Mrs. Rowan? You don't know power. Not real power. You've made this personal." He leaned forward, eyes narrowing until I felt his stare like a knife point. "And if you think this ends here, you're a fool, because I still have the law, and I intend to use it." The room went silent. The rage that had filled it seconds earlier froze, suspended in the air. His words slithered through the crowd, leaving a chill. I didn't flinch, but my stomach dropped. He wasn't bluffing, because the weapon he was about to unleash wasn't hiding in financials or bylaws. It was aimed directly at me. But Thaddeus wasn't done. He had one last weapon, and it had my name on it. The letter came like a snake in the mailbox, venom folded neatly into cream-colored stationery. Notice of civil suit. Defamation. Thaddeus Prynne had done exactly what he promised. He wasn't going to go quietly. If he couldn't silence me with fines, if he couldn't intimidate me with harassment, if he couldn't hold back the tide of neighbors turning against him, he would drag me into court, force me to spend money, time, and peace of mind defending myself. And he thought this would break me. But he had underestimated one thing. I wasn't standing alone anymore. Cassian Holt read the notice with a wry smile, tossing it back onto his desk as if it were a bad joke. "Defamation," he muttered. "Classic desperation move. When they've got nothing else, they sue the truth-tellers." I leaned forward, heart pounding. "Can he actually win this?" Cassian's eyes gleamed. "Not if what you said was true. And Callista, you've got a mountain of proof." The day of the trial, the courthouse felt like sacred ground and battlefield all at once. The hall smelled of polished wood, old books, and the faint tang of cleaning chemicals. My boots echoed against the marble floor as Cassian and I walked toward the courtroom, my heart thrumming with every step. Inside, the room was cold, the kind of cold that comes from both air conditioning and tension. Rows of benches were packed with neighbors, reporters, and curious onlookers. Phones were tucked away, but I could see pens poised over notebooks, cameras waiting outside the double doors. The world was watching. At the front, Judge Honoria Cresthaven presided with a gaze sharp enough to cut stone. She was known in our county for her no-nonsense rulings, her ability to slice through theatrics and lay bare the truth. Her robe hung neatly, her gavel rested like a thunderbolt beside her. When she called the court to order, the crack of her gavel was deafening, reverberating through the wood-paneled chamber. "Plaintiff, state your case." Thaddeus rose with all the pomp he could muster. His suit was immaculate, his hair combed to perfection, though I could see the faint sheen of sweat at his temples. He launched into his tirade. "Your Honor, the defendant, Mrs. Callista Rowan, has engaged in a reckless and malicious campaign against myself and the board of Maple Ash Court HOA. She displayed an illegal banner accusing us of theft, she spread falsehoods to the press, and she has defamed my character publicly. My reputation has been irreparably harmed." His voice trembled on the last word, though he tried to disguise it with righteous indignation. Cassian didn't even flinch. He leaned over to me, whispering, "Watch how quickly this falls apart." When it was our turn, Cassian rose, calm and sharp, his voice cutting through the charged air. "Your Honor, defamation requires one thing: a false statement, and the truth, inconvenient as it may be for Mr. Prynne, is an absolute defense against such claims." He lifted a folder, thick with documents. "These are the very financial records subpoenaed from the HOA, records signed by Mr. Prynne himself. They show inflated landscaping contracts, kickbacks to relatives, and blatant misuse of funds. My client did not fabricate these accusations. She revealed them." The neighbors in the gallery murmured, their whispers buzzing like hornets. Judge Cresthaven banged her gavel once, restoring order. Cassian continued, "The banner, the interviews, the so-called campaign, every word Mrs. Rowan spoke was backed by fact. That is not defamation, that is truth, and the law is clear. Truth is an absolute defense." Legal nugget. In U.S. defamation law, truth is always a defense. If a statement can be proven true, it cannot be defamatory, no matter how damaging it is to the subject's reputation. Thaddeus's attorney tried to object, claiming that the wording of the banner was inflammatory and recklessly damaging, but Judge Cresthaven cut him off. "Counselor, inflammatory is not the same as false. Do you dispute the evidence?" Silence. Thaddeus shifted in his seat, his lips pressed tight, his eyes darting like a trapped animal. His arrogance, once towering, had shriveled under the weight of documents that bore his own signature. Cassian pressed the advantage. "Your Honor, the plaintiff has used the court as a weapon, hoping to punish my client not for lying, but for daring to tell the truth. This is not justice. This is abuse of the legal system." The judge turned her gaze to Thaddeus, and the silence that followed was suffocating. You could feel the entire room waiting, breathless for her to speak. Finally, her gavel came down like thunder. "Case dismissed. This court will not be used as a tool for intimidation. Mr. Prynne, your conduct as both HOA president and plaintiff is disgraceful. Consider this your final warning before further legal consequences are pursued against you." The room erupted, not in chaos, but in applause. Neighbors clapped, some even cheered softly, their relief pouring out like water through a broken dam. Thaddeus sat frozen, his face ashen, his eyes locked on me with venom but no power left to wield. I felt my shoulders loosen, my lungs finally expand. The tension that had coiled around me for weeks released in a flood. But in the midst of the cheers, I heard only one sound. The echo of the gavel still ringing in my ears. The sound of the gavel was victory, but also the sound of his downfall. The gavel's echo faded, but its weight lingered. It wasn't just the dismissal of a frivolous lawsuit, it was the sound of a tyrant's fall. And as the courtroom emptied, I knew this was only the beginning of Thaddeus Prynne's reckoning. Within weeks, the cracks in his empire split wide open. The Attorney General's office announced a preliminary investigation into the Maple Ash Court HOA's finances. Subpoenas weren't just falling on desks now. They were ripping through his life, exposing every crooked contract and every siphoned dollar. His cousins. Company shuttered almost overnight, the paper trail too damning to survive. Neighbors who had once whispered in fear now spoke openly. The hallways of our community meetings, once suffocating with silence, filled with voices demanding accountability. For the first time, Thaddeus couldn't hide behind his gavel, his smirk, or Mavis's scribbled notes. He was cornered, and the truth was holding the torch. The board moved swiftly. With 2 members already resigned and Mavis vanished into disgrace, the rest were forced to restructure under mounting pressure. By unanimous vote, Thaddeus was removed as president. He didn't step down gracefully. He was dragged out by his own arrogance, sputtering threats but powerless all the same. That night, Maple Ash Court looked different. Not in its bricks or lawns, but in its people. Neighbors gathered in clusters, talking, laughing, sharing stories of battles they had kept bottled up for years. Silas Creel clasped my hand with tears in his eyes. "We're free of him," he whispered, and in his voice I heard the relief of a man who had carried too much sorrow in silence. But the real moment came later, when I stood alone in my yard. The wind picked up, cool and steady, rustling the trees, carrying the scent of freshly cut grass. I walked to the base of my flagpole, rope in hand. For months this pole had been the symbol of their tyranny, the excuse they used to torment me. But now, it was mine again. Not just metal in the ground, not just a stand for fabric, but a monument to resilience. I raised the stars and stripes slowly, the pulley creaking, the flag climbing into the fading light of dusk. When it reached the top, the wind caught it, snapping it out wide, bold and beautiful against the darkening sky. The sound filled me with the same pride it always had, but this time, there was something more. Victory. Behind me, I heard footsteps. Reverie slipped her hand into mine, her smile soft but steady. "You did it," she whispered. "No," I said, my eyes never leaving the flag. "We did it." The cloth cracked again overhead, louder this time, almost defiant. It wasn't just a flag anymore. It was proof that bullies can be beaten, that arrogance can be shattered, and that ordinary homeowners, people like me, like us, can rise when pushed too far. I turned back toward the street. Neighbors stood on their porches, watching, some clapping softly, some saluting, some just smiling with relief. The tyranny that had ruled this block for years was gone, and the air felt lighter because of it. But I also knew something else. This wasn't just about one man, or one board, or one street. There were thousands of HOAs across this country, some honest, some corrupt, and in too many neighborhoods, people like Thaddeus held unchecked power, wielding fear like a weapon. That's why I had to leave my neighbors with a message. "Never let an HOA bully you," I told them, my voice carrying across the street. "Their power is only real if you let it go unchallenged. And the moment you stand up, the moment you call out the truth, they crumble, because bullies can't survive in the light." Silence followed, then applause. The kind of applause that wasn't just for me. It was for all of us. For standing. For refusing to bow. That night, as the stars emerged, I sat on my porch, the flag snapping above me. My phone buzzed nonstop. Messages from strangers who had seen the news reports. People from other states, other neighborhoods, telling me their HOA horror stories. Veterans fined for service flags. Families threatened over garden choices. Retirees harassed until they sold. The stories poured in, each one proof that this battle wasn't mine alone. And if my fight could help even one of them stand taller, then every fine, every threat, every sleepless night had been worth it. Before I turned in, I recorded one final message. "What would you do in my shoes?" I asked, looking straight into the camera. "Would you back down? Or would you fight? Share your story, because the more we speak, the less they can silence us. And subscribe, because next week's fight makes this one look tame." I paused, letting the silence breathe, letting the weight settle. Then I gave them a taste of what was coming. Next week, I'll tell you about the HOA that bulldozed a veterans workshop until the sheriff showed up. I smiled, because I already knew that story was one of fire and fury too. The wind snapped the flag one more time above me, its sound rolling across Maple Ash Court like a battle cry. And for the first time in a long time, I knew my home was truly mine.